Good morning, everyone. Wonderful to see you. Here. Thank you so much for joining us. I heard there was just a little bit of a mix-up on the transportation over here, but nothing that your folks couldn't conquer. So I want to welcome everybody. This is one of the premier humanities event every fall at the University of Oklahoma. And all of this is the Neustadt Lit Fest. And the culmination of the Lit Fest will be on Wednesday night. We will give the Neustadt International Prize for Literature to Ananda Devi. And this is a very big deal. This is the kind of thing that is noted all around the world. Wire services will pick this up, and people will be celebrating what we do here. So before we go any further, I would like to get Richard and Pat to go ahead and play the University of Oklahoma land acknowledgement.
Long before the University of Oklahoma was established, the land on which the university now resides was the traditional home of the Caddo Nation and Wichita and affiliated tribes. We acknowledge this territory once also served as a hunting ground, trade exchange point, and migration route for the Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, and Osage nations. Today, 39 tribal nations dwell in the state of Oklahoma as a result of settler and colonial policies that were designed to assimilate Native people. The University of Oklahoma recognizes the historical connection our university has with its Indigenous community. We acknowledge, honor, and respect the diverse Indigenous peoples connected to this land. We fully recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereign rights of all of Oklahoma's 39 tribal nations. This acknowledgement is aligned with our university's core value of creating a diverse and inclusive community. It is an institutional responsibility to recognize and acknowledge the people, culture, and history that make up our entire OU community.
We also have a welcome from our wonderful president at the University of Oklahoma, Joe Harris. Could you please play that now too?
Hello, I'm OU President Joe Harris. It's my honor to welcome you to this Neustadt Prize event sponsored by World Literature Today. At the University of Oklahoma, we are extremely proud of the Neustadt Prize program. Thanks to the Neustadt family, for over 5 decades, there have been Neustadt Prizes given on our campus and celebrated all over the world. The acclaimed Neustadt International Prize for Literature and the NSK Neustadt Prize for Children's and Young Adult Literature are world-famous honors. They've been celebrated by the Swedish Academy that awards the Nobel Prize in Literature and by many international writers and scholars. I am so pleased that you can join us in recognizing this jewel in the crown of OU. As we turn to the next 50 years of the Neustadt Prize program, it's only fitting that this year's Neustadt International Prize for Literature goes to a writer of Ananda Devi's achievements and renown. Ananda, who is from Mauritius, holds a PhD in social anthropology and is the author of 30 volumes of novels, short fiction, and poetry. Recently honored by the French Academy and the French government, she is a leading figure in French literature and international culture. Several of her works have been made into films, and she continues to deeply impact those focused on gender relations and women's issues, making her one of the authors shaping the future of literature around the world. In many ways, the Neustadt Prize and its celebration of literary voices from across the globe embodies our fundamental purpose at OU, to change lives. We are grateful to the Neustadt family and World Literature Today for making this important tradition possible. We also thank the many Neustadt Prize winners who have contributed to the richness of literature and culture everywhere. We appreciate all of you who have joined us for this year's festival. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. We have a great president. One of the goals of this Lit Fest starting today is to create a cultural backdrop for Ananda Devi's work. These events are a living monument to the power of literature to enhance our lives and help us to understand the world around us. Now, I noticed this morning that we are honored by the presence of 3 members of the Neustadt family that generously support the Neustadt program. Kathy Neustadt, Nancy Barcelo, and Sam Barcelo are here. Could you please stand so that we can recognize you and thank you for all that you're making possible? Now, it is a distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning, the Neustadt Prize winner for 2024. What an honor. Ananda Devi is a distinguished writer from the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. I feel like I have to say that, in the Indian Ocean, because I had a hard time finding it. Before she became a writer, she trained to be a scholar. She studied at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London and earned a PhD in cultural anthropology. Shortly after that achievement, she pivoted to her true calling and published a collection of short stories. The direction of her career never shifted again, and she has been publishing many successful and highly acclaimed novels ever since. After the year 2000, her acclaim and renown grew at a faster pace when she published another string of really brilliant works. In 2006, she published the work that became the representative text of the Neustadt International Prize for Literature, what we know in English as Eve Out of Her Ruins. If you haven't seen this film, you need to. We've already made the link to the film available, and we can share it with you. You need to see it. It is just an amazing work. This important work won several prizes, and in 2012, it was successfully adapted as a film by Ananda Devi, Sharvan Anandan, and Harikrishna Anandan, her son and her husband. I want you to take note of one thing in particular. It does not happen very often that we can witness at close range as an important writer ascends to the next rank in world literature and culture. When this happens, it is an important moment, a kind of revelation across many cultures all at once. The 2024 Neustadt Lit Fest is one of those occasions, and I invite you to savor the current moment of Ananda Devi's arrival. This is an experience as unique for us as it is for her, and none of us may ever have the opportunity for this experience again. In other words, when she receives the Neustadt International Prize for Literature on Wednesday evening, that event will signal to the world that she has become one of the most important writers anywhere. Please give a warm Oklahoma welcome to the winner of the 2024 Neustadt International Prize for Literature, Ananda Devi.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. And I can't tell you what an emotional moment this is for me. Not just for me, but also for Mauritius. Because wherever I go in the United States, people, when I say I'm from Mauritius, people generally don't know what it is, where it is, and I have to explain a little bit about it. But to come here and talk about Mauritian literature is an even greater honor. And I'm very happy to have another Mauritian writer who's here, whom I would like to call with a lot of affection the next generation of writers who are emerging and shining. So it's Priya Hine who's here. She's on a residence at Iowa University at the moment. It's strange. Everything is happening let's say in the month of October 2024, because coincidentally, I have two books that came out in this month or last month. And one is a re-edition of my very first novel to be published, Rue la Poudrière, which was published in 1998, but which I finished writing in 1984. And this is my latest book called La nuit s'ajoute à la nuit, Night prolongs the night, which is published in 2024. So there's 40 years exactly between the writing of these two books. And thinking about what I was going to say today, I was wondering, well, what happened in these 40 years and sort of 28 books that separate these two books? I think that a lot happened, and at the same time, I'm more or less the same writer who was writing Rue la Poudrière. This book is about a young Mauritian Creole prostitute living in Port Louis, let's say in the late 1970s, after Mauritius gained its independence. And its economy was solely based on the cultivation of sugarcane fields, which were the heritage of colonialism and slavery. So all this economic hardship was also linked to a lot of social hardship. And people were struggling, and some of them were living on the brink of poverty. And for some reason, I decided to be part of those who felt that they were neither seen nor heard. And I wanted to sort of go deep and become one of these people whom society tends to ignore while they're rushing towards economic development. So I chose to put myself in the mind and body of this young woman who, at the start of the novel, is running. Running where? We don't know. Away from something or someone, or towards something or someone. We are immediately adrift in the turmoil of her thoughts in a kind of stream of consciousness narrative, which is both harsh and poetic. Her parents, Marie and Edouard, are both larger-than-life characters, and together with Malak, the pimp, create a kind of monstrous trinity reigning over the destiny of Paul, who's the narrator. And her tragic story is announced from the beginning. We know that it's not going to end well. It is a relentlessly dark novel. And it seems to me today that it was perhaps excessively pessimistic for the times, where there was a kind of hope following the independence of the country. There didn't seem to be any light coming out of Port Louis, the capital of Mauritius, where the novel is set. When I was rereading it for this new edition, I saw that, in fact, despite the reality of these human tragedies, the novel actually belongs to the universe of myths, where the protagonists have to go from one ordeal to the other, as if to test their essence, their courage, their resilience. Port Louis is more akin to the inferno described by Dante than to the capital of the country, slowly emerging from centuries of colonial rule. I was also surprised to realize that I was writing this novel in the year when my second son was born, 1984. And I wonder how I could, at 27, delve so deeply into the despair of my narrator with a newborn baby in my arms. But perhaps the writerly persona kept herself well apart from the womanly persona, and perhaps there was a non-porous barrier between the two. So I'll read a small extract that I translated from the French, just so that you have an idea of what my voice was like at the time. When Port Louis vibrates with this primeval rage, with the screams of man, an inhuman creature exhumed from the scrapyards, when the city shakes with the force of its subterranean rebellion, I am the one who embodies the most closely its bitterness for having been traded for all kinds of greed. Whether it be the industrialist who contemplates his empire from the safety of the lair that separates him from humankind, or Malacre, who trades in the bodies and souls of human beings, they have all sliced up the city according to their desires, transformed it into a spider web that awaits the next insect, already half dead, hanging on to the branching traceries. How much time does a city need to accomplish its own disintegration? Strangely enough, this passage could apply to what's happening today with the finance system and the political system, even in the island, slicing up this country with their divisive rhetoric. Now, my latest book, La Nuit s'ajoute à la nuit, is both similar and a different beast. It is certainly a work of maturity. The writer and the woman here are brought close together and seem to have become a unified whole, more so than in any of my other books. Since it is not a fiction, it is a text where the I coincides with my own self and is able to express both a profound sadness about the subject matter and the world we live in, and to find some kind of hope in the courage of the real people described in the book. It is also a book that is not filled with rage and fury, as Rue la Poudrière was, but by a deep-seated melancholy that is perhaps closer to who I am now. It is about a Second World War memorial in Lyon, France, which had originally been a prison, the Montluc prison, built in 1921. So during the German occupation, French resistance fighters were incarcerated there, as well as thousands of Jews, including 44 children, prior to being shot or sent to the concentration camps. After the liberation under the French, it was the German soldiers and French collaborators' turn to be incarcerated in this prison before their trials. In the 1950s, French communists protesting against the Indochina War were shut in this prison. And yet later, it was the turn of Algerian resistance fighters who fought in the War of Independence against France. 11 Algerian prisoners were guillotined in this very prison. Montluc became afterwards a common law prison, and the women's wing was permanently closed in 2009. In a single place, in the very center of Lyon, almost a century of history has passed through, leaving its marks, its wounds, its tragic memories in the seeping walls, proof, if need be, of the criminal forgetfulness of humankind. But as I spent one night alone in the prison before writing the book, the resistance fighters, whether French or Algerian, began in a way to speak to me. I felt that I was touching a small part of their turmoil and horror, but also the light that arose from their courage, their belief in humanity, their refusal to compromise with the dominant power, their readiness to undergo the most horrendous tortures and even death, rather than give up on their beliefs. Addressing René Lénaud, a poet who was executed by the Germans when he wasn't yet 33 years old, I tell him this: I can only offer you one night, a ridiculous gift, but I try to instill into it everything that I am, this empathy that has so often caused me pain, but that has also given me the deepest of intuitions. It leads me to you, inside you, and I touch these walls that you have touched. I raise my eyes towards the narrow rectangle through which drifts a ghostly light. I sit on this floor where you lie down, and I try just for one moment to be with you, inside your suffering, your fear, your regrets, your love, and this crazy hope that still resists despite of everything, our strength, our curse. So that just for this short moment, René, you keep on living in my breast. When I was writing this book, the echoes of the world surrounded me. I was writing about different forms of resistance, different forms of barbarity. And this is what I was hearing, as if the deaths going on in the world were bleeding into my book. Towards the end, I was filled with a kind of desolation. I didn't know how to finish the book. And this is what I wrote in the postscriptum. What I have written isn't over. I cannot end it. I do not want to end it. It will never end. It can never end, as long as we don't end it, we humans. Oh, let's just end it all. What can I make them say, they there in their ruins, in the dying day, when their eyes only receive raining rubbles? What book can be filled with so much pain? So between these two books, I'm still saying more or less the same thing. What I learned in the meantime is the art of saying more with less. No need for an accumulation of adjectives, of adverbs, of endless descriptions. I have perhaps learned to be spare, to make each word count. For those who want to write, I always say the same thing. You can pour everything into the first draft, the most passionate, perhaps the most true, but afterwards the craft comes in, reading each sentence and asking yourself whether it is there for a reason. A common denominator between all my books is the intensity with which each text, whether it is a novel, a short story, a series of poems, or a nonfiction book, emerges. This intensity, I would almost say this haunting, is essential for me to be able to sustain the writing, especially of novels, over the long haul. A case in point is Le Sari Vert, the green sari. I have always said that this was the book I was always meant to write, perhaps the reason why I had to write. After I finished it, I actually thought for a while that I wouldn't be able to write anything else. The origin of this story goes back to when I was around 10 years old and heard it from my mother. And this is what I wrote in Deux Mâles et une Marmite, a book about writing, where I revisited this text, addressing myself to my younger self, the you in the following passage. On that day of the absent cyclone, whispered words would be the tempest that would shake the foundations of our family. You knew that your mother had always been sad, but the reason was unknown. From that day onwards, you would know the reason, the source, the origin of her pain, if ever there can be an origin of pain in this long chain of annihilation that are families. A few sentences, a few words, and an image. She tells you about a dead woman, the one without a first name, without a face, without a tomb. She tells you about an erasure, the image that will be branded onto your memory and will lead you towards the darkest of hauntings. They were not words, it was something torn from her, as when someone spits blood when coughing or regurgitates bits of lung when they can no longer breathe. The day of the absent cyclone, a woman will be turned into a statue by a pot of boiling rice thrown over her. She will invade your mind and your body. I heard this story when I was a child, about a woman turned into a statue of grief and pain by boiling rice thrown over her. I knew I would tell that story one day. Once I started writing novels and being published, I kept thinking about it. It took me 3 attempts over a span of 15 years. The story is about an 80-year-old man dying of some disease who comes to his daughter's house to be cared for. His adult granddaughter is also there. Both the women are convinced that the old man is responsible for the death of his wife when she was just 22. They want him to tell what really happened. The daughter, Kitty, is under the sway of her father, caught in a love-hate relationship she cannot get out of. The granddaughter, Malika, only wants revenge and finds a perverse joy in telling her grandfather that she loves a woman and how they pleasure each other. But the novel is told in the first person by the old man himself, who used to be a medical doctor. And what we read and hear is his conviction of his power, even as he is dying. He calls himself Docteur Dieu, Doctor God, and gives full vent to his misogyny. He despises women. He justifies the violence against his young wife by saying it was an act of love. For the entire time of writing, I was in his head. I heard his sarcastic laughter and his disparaging comments. I was him, and I enjoyed it. I actually thought it was a funny novel. Yet when it came out, some readers said it was the most violent novel they had ever read. It took me 15 years to find a way in. The way in was by letting him tell the story. I felt afterwards that I had created the ultimate monster, the one with no remorse, no regret, no questioning of self. One of the monsters I met in the writing of my last book, La Nuit s'ajoute à la nuit, is Klaus Barbie, who was also imprisoned in that same prison, symbolically before his trial in Lyon. And looking at his picture, his photograph in the cell where he was kept, I kept going back to my domestic tyrant and thinking how violence, the source of violence, its origins, can be within a familial environment or can be in a world global environment, and that origin is still the same. It comes out from that person's unwillingness of confronting his or her conscience and of ever questioning these acts against others, the acts of horror and barbarity against others. I realized then that this exploration of violence was a constant in all my books. How does a perpetrator justify the act of violence? How is the choice between committing this act and turning away from it, how is it determined by our own individuality? And then how do we explain the spirit of the horde, of the pack that leads ordinary people to commit atrocities, as with slavery, with the Shoah, with the Rwandan genocide, and the terrible acts being committed today under our passive eyes? Is this the result of our larger specialized brains? In my last novel, published in 2023, Le Jour des Caméléons, The Day of the Chameleons, I imagine a kind of apocalypse hitting the island of Mauritius in the near future, brought about by the actions of men. This apocalypse, which was, according to the novel, breeding for centuries, is brought on by 4 catalysts. Nandini, a 50-year-old woman, wife of a judge, living a kind of superficially perfect life, suddenly decides one day, that day precisely, to drop everything and leave without knowing where she's going. René, a man in his 40s, who feels useless and has no reason to get up in the morning, must that day take his beloved niece, Sarah, to school. Sarah herself, 10 years old, intuitive, worried, luminous, decides that day to put on a white dress, which will seem like a fatality. And finally, Zig Zig, a small-time crook from Baie du Tombeau, leader of a gang, will, on that same day, decide to exert his revenge on an enemy gang that wants to seize his territory. This fortuitous meeting on an ill-famed beach of Baie du Tombeau will turn explosive and sweep through the entire island like a tempest, like a cyclone, while the silent chameleons wait for their day of triumph to come. when men will have finally destroyed themselves. Between them all, who are the heroes? Who are the monsters? They are all ambiguous, flawed, and their decisions will change radically the image we have of them as the story progresses. This novel is at the same time a work of anticipation, a classical tragedy, an ecological fable, and a kind of thriller. But I was not only writing about my country, but also about the world, for all the issues addressed in the novel are the same everywhere. Have we reached a point of no return? I ask. Maybe not, but there's not much time left. Delving into these hearts of darkness, to borrow a well-known title, but not in a way that ostensibly opposes good and evil, heroes and monsters, the right way and the wrong way, allows me to look upon people in society once they are devoid of the masks that distort our understanding. As a writer, my job is to lead my readers to ask their own questions and try to find their own answers that are not spoon-fed to them from outside, but from their own inner selves. People are not black and white. They are all shades of gray. We are all complex and ambiguous, capable of the best and the worst, and I do believe that literature is the place where this complexity and ambiguity can be fully explored. I know that writers cannot change the world, but I believe they do have their role to play in providing a different worldview, or rather many different worldviews, and in trying to offer a balanced voice amidst the cacophony of voices all too ready to present fallacies as facts, to judge without knowledge, and to condemn rather than understand. After 5 decades of utter dedication to writing, I believe it is a precious consolation. Thank you.